Good day to each and everyone. Our report is all about sampling technique and its different methods. But first, let me define to you what is sampling technique. Sampling technique is the name or other identification of the specific process by which the entities of the sample have been selected. Sampling technique means selecting the group that you will actually collect data from in your research. So, it implies that it is a method that allows researchers to gather information about a population based on results from a subset of the population without having to investigate every individual. Next, let us deal about some terminologies that are used in research, especially in sampling. First is the population. So what is population? Population is the entire group that you want to draw conclusions about. It can be defined in terms of geographical location, age, income, and many other characteristics. Now, when we say population sampling, it deals about a complete set of elements or person that possess common characteristic defined by the sampling criteria established by the researcher. Moreover, population is composed with two groups. It includes target population and accessible population. So target population means that it is an entire group of people or objects to which researcher wishes to generalize the study findings. For example, all people with AIDS. Therefore, when we say target population, it has a universal scope of sampling that revolves to a certain entire group. The second group that is involved in population is the accessible population. Accessible population is the portion of the population to which researcher has reasonable access. It may be a subset of the target population. Now, let me connect my example to target population in order for us to see the difference between the two. So we have all people with AIDS in the metropolitan St. Louis area. Hence, accessible population means that it may be limited to region, state, city, country, or institution, unlike the target population that it has a universal scope in sampling. At this point, let us proceed to the term sampling frame. Sampling frame is the actual list of individuals that the sample will be drawn. For example, a list of all people with AIDS in the metropolitan St. Louis area who are members of the St. Louis Effort for AIDS. Sampling frame is a list that is used to define a researcher's population of interest. The sampling frame defines a set of elements from which a researcher can select a sample of the target population. Next is the sample. Sample are the selected elements, either people or objects, that are chosen for participation in a study. People are referred to as subjects or participants. Thus, a sample refers to a similar manageable version of a larger group. It is a subset containing the characteristics of a larger population. The image below shows the concept of a sample. It implies that sample are the participants or people who are selected from a certain population. Then now, what does bias mean? It is a bias in which a sample is collected in such a way that some members of the intended population have a lower or higher sampling probability than others. Sampling bias occurs when some members of a population are systematically more likely to be selected in a sample than others. Or, in other words, bias means that it is not equally likely to have been selected. Now, let's proceed to the statistical terms in sampling. First is the statistic. Statistics are the numerical value or measure of a characteristic of the sample. Remember, S stands for sample and statistic. So, statistic is a quantity such as the mean of a sample that is computed from a sample, while parameter are the numerical value or measure of a characteristic of the population. Remember, P stands for parameter and population. Therefore, parameter is a quantity such as a mean or variance that describe a statistical population. Sampling distribution is a statistic that determines the probability of an event based on data from a small group within a large population. Its primary purpose is to establish representative results of small samples of a comparatively large population. Sampling distribution refers to a probability distribution of a statistic that comes from choosing random samples of a given population. It also depends on multiple factors, such as statistic, sample size, sampling process, and the overall population. It is used to help calculate statistics such as means, ranges, variances, and standard deviations for the given sample. Sampling distribution has three types of distribution. First is the sampling distribution of mean, second is the sampling distribution of proportion, and third is the t-distribution. Sampling distribution of mean is the most common type of sampling distribution is of the mean. It focuses on calculating the mean of every sample group chosen from the population and plotting the data points. Therefore, sampling distribution of mean calculates the mean of every sample group chosen from the population and plot out all the data points. It is the mean of the population where the items are sampled. If the population distribution is normal, then the sampling distribution of the mean is likely to be normal for the samples of all sizes. While sampling distribution of proportion focuses on proportions in population. Samples are selected and their populations are calculated. It gives us information about the proportions in a population. So the mean of all the sample proportions calculated from each sample group would become the proportion of the entire population. However, t-distribution is a sampling distribution that involves a small population or one where not much is known about it. Thus, t-distribution is used to estimate the mean of the population, confidence intervals, statistical differences, and linear regression. Now let's talk about sampling and non-sampling errors. Sampling errors denotes a statistical error arising of a certain sample selected being unrepresentative to the population of interest. Thus, it is an error which occurs when the sample selected does not contain the true characteristics, qualities, or figures of the whole population. Moreover, they can also arise out of defective sample, design faulty demarcation of units, wrong choice of statistic, and substitution of sampling unit done by the enumerator for their convenience. However, non-sampling error is an error arising from human error, such as error in problem identification, method, or procedure. So, it means that non-sampling error is an umbrella term which comprises of all the errors other than sampling error. They arise due to a number of reasons: error in problem definition, questionnaire design, approach, coverage information provided by respondents, data preparation, collection, tabulation, and analysis.
Random sampling, it describes when every element in population has an equal chance of being chosen for the sample. So there are four types of random sampling. First is simple random sampling. Second is stratified random sampling. Third is systematic random sampling. And lastly is cluster random sampling. So first, simple random sampling is a subset of a statistical population in which member of the subset has an equal probability of being chosen. Simple random sampling is meant to be unbiased representation of a group. For example, the researcher gives each member of the population a number, then the researcher will draw the number from the box randomly to choose samples. So second is stratified random sampling. is a sampling method in which the total population is divided into smaller groups or strata to complete the sampling process. A stratified sample is one that ensures the subgroups of a given population which the whole of the research study. For example, one might divide a sample of adults into subgroups by age like 18 to 29, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, 50 to 59, and so on. To stratify this sample, the researcher will then randomly select proportional amount of people from each age group. So third is systematic random sampling. Is a probability sampling method where researchers select members of the population of a regular interval. Is a type of probability sampling method in which sample members from a large population are selected according to a random starting point but with a fixed periodic interval. This interval, called the sampling interval, is calculated by dividing the population size by desired sample size. Systematic sampling is an extended implementation of probability sampling in which each member of the group is selected at regular periods to form a sample. Example is, if a local NGO is seeking to form a systematic sample of 500 volunteers from a population of 5,000, they can select every 10 person in the population to build a sample systematically. So, lastly is cluster random sampling. Is a probability sampling technique in which all population elements are categorized into mutually exclusive and exhaustive groups called cluster. Clusters are selected for sampling and all or some elements from selected cluster comprise the sample. So, one of the example of this is organization is looking to survey the performance of smartphones across Germany. They can divide the entire country's population into cities and select further towns with the highest population and also filter those using mobile devices. There are types of cluster sampling. First is single stage cluster sampling. Second is double stage sampling. Third is multi-stage sampling. So, single stage cluster sampling is you collect data from every unit within the selected clusters. Then, double stage sampling, you select random sample of units from within the cluster. So, lastly is multi-stage sampling. You repeat the procedure of randomly sampling elements from within the cluster until have reached the manageable sample.
Convenient sampling is a type of non-probability sampling in which people are sampled simply because they are convenient sources of data for researchers. So, it is a type of non-probability sampling that involves a sample being drawn from that part of the population that is close to hand. This type of sampling is most useful for pilot testing, and it also a method of collecting samples by taking samples that are conveniently located around a location of internal services. A convenient sample where the sample is taken from the group of people that is easy to contact or reach. For example, you standing in the grocery store or mall and asking people to answer questions would be an example of convenience. It is the most commonly used sampling technique as it's incredibly prompt, uncomplicated, and economical. So judgment sampling. Judgment sampling, also referred to as judgmental sampling or authoritative sampling, is a non-probability sampling technique where the researcher selects units to be sampled based on his own existing knowledge or his professional judgment. So, the judgment sampling is a type of purposive sampling. It occurs when units are selected for inclusion in a study based on the professional judgment of the researcher. It also relying on their own judgment. So quota sampling. Quota sampling means that elements from population are chosen on a non-random basis and all members of the population do not have an equal chance of being selected to be a part of the sample group. So this is where you take a very tailored sample that's in proportion to some characteristic or trait of a population. For example, if your population consists of 45% of female and 55% of male, your sample should reflect those percentage. Snowball sampling. Snowball sampling or change referral sampling is defined as a non-probability sampling technique in which the samples have traits that are rare to find. This is a sampling technique in which existing subjects provide referrals to recruit samples required for a research study. So, this snowball sampling is where research participants recruit other participants for a test or study. It is used where potential participants are hard to find.